Okay. Talking about greens for evergreen plants for decorating during winter. It's taken me a while to be comfortable talking about this because I'm not really a cutting type of person. I like my plants out in the garden, and that's where I mostly watch them and see them. But over the years, I have done enough of it. And we have great crew of volunteers who do flower arrangements for us in our buildings. And so I keep an eye on what lasts and what doesn't last very long. I'm always pulling things out and putting them in the compost bin if they don't last. So I'm going to go through and talk about from my experience. Some of these things that I'm going to talk about are great for indoor decorations if you're putting them in water. Most of what I'll talk about will be ones that you don't have to put in water, but you can use for decorating in various ways. Some will be more obscure than others that members of the Raulston Arboretum may have in their gardens because we give y'all weird plants. Others will be things that you can get at garden centers, kind of wherever you are. As always, when I give a tour, I love questions, I love comments, I love being told that I'm wrong because that's how I learn things. So as I'm talking about this, there are probably people here joining me on this tour who know more than me about many of these things. So I'd love to hear your feedback. Just remember, if you wave your hand, we'll get you a microphone so you can ask the question so everybody can hear it and witness me saying, I don't know about that, because I will say that a lot. All right, let's get started. We're gonna head out this way first. Not very far though. So we're gonna start with something people don't think about very much, and those are vines. There are some great evergreen vines, and as many of you may know, I love vines. Love them. I grow vines all over the place. Here we actually have two evergreen vines kind of mixed together. One of these is an evergreen, Holbelia. Holbelia is kind of a weird vine in the Lardabaceae family. Not one you grow very often, but it's one that we're growing more and more and getting really excited about how well it does. This is a narrow-leafed one, and I'm sorry, I said Holbelia. It's real closely related. This is a Stautonia, but they're very closely related, and I have a hard time telling them apart often. Same family, though. The Stautonia and the Holbelia, beautiful evergreen vines. Every one I've grown has been rock solid for us. They are vigorous, they are large. In the wild, they grow up in trees and will top out, 30, 40, 80 feet high, but you can keep them constrained. You just prune your vines after they flower to keep them in line. This one has these trifoliate leaves. It's real easy one to grow. They range from a little bell-shaped white to pink to lavender flowers. If they fruit, you'll get kind of these sausage-shaped fruits that open up, and it's got kind of a gooey interior, kind of jelly-like interior. That's actually very good. It's easy. These are always easy to find in the wild if there are monkeys around, because there'll be bunches of the skins of the fruit and the seed on the ground because monkeys love it. We have another one growing back here that's got a single leaf. It doesn't want to pull out quite as well. Here we go, little piece, break it off. This is another favorite of mine, Schisandra. This is one Schisandra incarnata. Believe it or not, this vine is related to our magnolias, to alysium, the anise shrub. And if you see it in flower, you can see the resemblance to the anise shrub. It is one of the most primitive of all flowering plants. We often talk about magnolias as being one of the most primitive of flowering plants. Schisandra, there's actually a fossil of what they think is the first evidence of flowering plant that's known. It's in fruit. It's like a little, little stem with little berries kind of spaced on it. Some Schisandra fruit looks exactly like that. So very, very primitive, but a great evergreen vine with these kind of narrow leaves. Again, can be large growing, but it's beautiful in flower, beautiful in fruit, either those long elongated fruits or little clusters. And they often call it Schisandra magnolia vine. That's how you'll sometimes see it. Both of these evergreen vines will stay green for quite a long time when they're cut. I first learned that by trimming them back and thinking I had pulled out all the stuff that I had trimmed, and then coming back a couple weeks later and they were starting to turn brown up there. I thought I'd killed it. It was just all the stuff that I didn't get out, but it took it weeks to do that. So I've taken to bringing some of these inside. I also use evergreen clematis, the Clematis armandii as a evergreen. Cut them, and you can make wreaths out of them. We've got some not really chandeliers, but hanging lights. We have them in our kitchen, in our dining room, and we weave this around. We used to do it with pine garland, but that always drove me crazy because the pine garland is wrapped with wire, to hold it together, and that means you can't compost it without doing a lot of work to get it off. It goes, in the trash can. Drives me crazy. It also drops needles and things all the time. You may get an occasional leaf drop off of these, but that's real easy to clean up than the pine needles. So I really like it. So on mantles, draped over doors. I think these are all really, really great plants for that. Any questions?
Yeah, if you could tell us the country of origin.
Sure. Both of these that I'm talking about, the Stauntonias, and the Hobelias and Schisandras are the hardy ones that we're growing are all Southeast Asia. They do range a little bit farther, but the ones that we're growing are all Southeast Asia. Others? Spell Stauntonia. On camera? Stauntonia. And I will tell you, we have a bunch of Schisandra from my home that we've propagated and brought in that was one of my favorite plants. A little bit thinner leafed than this, but with some real nice coloration on there. So Arboretum folks will be getting a chance at that at some point. Other questions? All right, we're going to bring it back closer to ground, not the vines now. So here we have an interesting little low kind of shrubby plant. This is a ruscus. Ruscus, sometimes called butcher's broom, and some of them are quite vicious. And these are mostly Mediterranean plants, so they grow kind of around the eastern end of the Mediterranean, both north of it and south of it. Fantastic evergreens. They look great all season. Very odd in how they flower. They flower on the tops of the leaves. Now, botanically, that's impossible because leaves don't give rise to flowers. But what actually, since the taxonomist couldn't admit that, or the botanist couldn't admit that they were wrong, that's not really true. There's actually, the midrib of this is actually, has the stem tissue going all the way up here. So these leaves are called cladodes. It's a little bit different botanically, but for most of us, it means that it flowers in the middle of the leaf. Now there are several species that are available. This is a hybrid, a naturally occurring hybrid called ruscus microglossum or microglossum. It's one that often the leaves are twisted, so instead of having the leaf, you can see the flower on the top or the bottom. This one actually has a fully open flower. I don't know how good our camera is. Can it get there? I can share it with you. But ruscus will generally last for ages and ages and ages once it's cut. even if it's not in water, it just lasts. And part of that is because what you're looking at is not truly leaf, so it doesn't have the same abscission point or point where it naturally wants to drop off the stem. So it stays on and it stays green, which is great. Now, if you have a lot of ruscus around and they get some good cross-pollination going, you can get some really nice fruits on there as well. We've got another, actually two more species in here. Get this dead stuff out of here. This little plant, this ruscus, is a really fine leafed one, stemmed, cladoted one. And this one, you get more of a sense of why it's called butcher's broom. I don't know why butcher's brooms are so tough, but this thing is pretty vicious. I'm always careful about how much I garden with plants that bite me. So I don't really grow these at home, nor do I want to cut them and make decorations out of them. But you can, and you can see on this one, it's got those fruits on there. So, that's a little bit showier, brings you a little bit something more to bring inside. And same thing, you can cut it and it will last and last and last. I prefer the hypoglossum and microglossum, which are more a little kinder and gentler than others. You do generally need to plant several plants to get good fruiting on those. There are some forms of ruscus that are more self-fruiting. There's one called the Elizabeth Lawrence form, or Elizabeth Lawrence, that is a self-fruitful one. It's another species. It's another one that's real vicious though, and stays a little smaller. But these are great if you have these spiny ruscus, if you have problems with dogs coming in your yard and doing their business. A nice little hedge of ruscus, of butcher's broom along the edge of your property, that will keep the dogs out. Won't keep the rabbits out. The rabbits, like to nest under them because nothing else wants to get in there. But still great plants. They generally grow in shady spots. You can put them out in full sun and they're fine, but they will grow in quite a bit of shade. They, like many plants, they'll fruit better in more sun, but really easy to grow in quite heavy shade. Questions?
It's not a question. What is this, a ruscus here?
Yes, down in front. I didn't want to overload you with ruscus. This is actually that ruscus Elizabeth Lawrence, the ruscus aculeatus Elizabeth Lawrence. And the one I showed before is ruscus, same species, ruscus aculeatus. It's just the narrow leaf form, angustifolius.
Is that oak tree healthy? It has a lot of missing bark.
Yeah, this oak tree is not terribly healthy. It's got a fungal problem. We are working on it. We're working with some of the better tree care companies. We think we're going to be able to save it, but we're not entirely sure.
It's gorgeous.
It is.
How old is it?
This predates the Arboretum, so we don't know. We know some of the earliest plants in here were from the 50s, so it could be that old, but it predates us.
I'm just curious, since we are talking about clippings and taking them in to decorate, how are they with pets, like cats?
Okay, great. Yeah, asking about how these plants are with pets, and all of these that I've talked about so far should be fine with pets. The ruscus are pretty hard to eat. The Schisandra, Holbelia, those should be fine based on that family. It's a very edible family. My experience in general with pets is that with plants, they'll sometimes eat enough to make themselves sick. But I have talked to vet after vet. I've talked to the folks at the NC State Vet School, which is one of the best around, and nobody can tell me about a house pet that has died eating plants, that they have gotten sick, but they've never died. Now there's some things that'll affect horses and cattle outside, cherries and things like that. But and generally when our pets eat plants enough to get sick, they're very bored. Is why they're doing it, and it's just something new that shows up that gets. But it's one of those issues that I think animal owners worry about more than they really need to.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, we are going to move on then. Now, a plant I learned as a house plant when I was in horticulture, but was amazed to find when I moved farther south that I could actually grow outside, are the cast iron plants. Cast iron plant, aspidistra, plant that's been grown ages and ages, was really popular in Victorian times. It was grown in feudal Japan as a specimen plant. A lot of variation to them. They grow all over Southeast Asia, from the tropics up to pretty cold areas. And we tend to think, when we think about bringing in cut evergreens, we think of woody plants, but there's quite a few herbaceous plants that are great for cutting and bringing inside. So you can cut just individual leaves. You see people using them in ikebana quite a bit. I see our fantastic flower arrangers, if they have a clear vase and they want to hide the stem, sometimes they'll cut a leaf and wrap it inside the jar. But you can take them, and once you get a good patch going, you can cut lots of stems and make some really beautiful arrangements in the house that are not in water, but kind of swags, things like that. Great backgrounds for berries and other plants. They're available. You can get them solid green. You can get them speckled with yellow. You can get them with stripes. You can get them with the white tips. There are just tons and tons of different ones. Tall ones, short ones, very, very leathery leaf ones, narrow leaves. There are all kinds of aspidistra. We have a pretty significant collection here at the Arboretum, and we've been collecting them in the wild as well, and new species are being found with quite a lot of regularity. So they're really interesting plants. I think they're great for cutting and bringing indoors. They're odd because when they flower way down here at the base, and you got to kind of pull any mulch back and look, and then they have these just alien looking, almost like something out of the ocean looking flowers down there, and then can form fruit.
What family are they in?
So aspidistra, they're in the family. This is one of those ones where they keep moving around. In the big sense, they are in the family, the Liliaceae family. Convolvulaceae, Aspidistastri, Asparagaceae, somewhere in there. I think we put them in Asparagaceae here now, but it kind of depends on your taxonomic preference, your botanist of record. And deer don't eat them.
How much cold can they stand?
How much cold can they stand? So the most common species, Aspidistra elatior, that's the one you learn as cast iron plant. This is, I don't have a label in front of me, but yeah, this is Aspidistra elatior. Will easily zone 7B. 7A, the tops will often get killed back. And I'm glad you mentioned cold hardiness. This is an issue people have a lot of times with evergreen, especially herbaceous plants, but also some things like the ruscus we talked about. Is you have a cold winter and some of the foliage looks a little bit burnt and doesn't look good. How do you deal with them? What I tend to do is after a cold winter, I'll cut all of it down and let it all reflush. But then when we don't have such a cold winter, maybe I'll take out a couple of the older leaves and just leave it. These cast iron plants take a lot to, it's a big leaf to produce. So this is one of the few plants where I really like to let new growth come up and have started getting good size before I cut off the old foliage, unless it's just awful, because otherwise it'll sometimes be the end of June before the foliage comes up if you cut it back too early. But I'm also a lazy gardener, so that's why I do it every 3 or 4 years. I'll just cut the whole thing back and then not cut it back for 3 or 4 years and live with a couple of scraggly looking leaves on there.
So what do you think makes the leaves look real scraggly in the winter? Is it the cold, or is it sun hitting them when they're cold? Like winter sun? It's
the cold more than anything else. The winter sun could be an issue with some of them, but it's really just a matter of age and sun. Some of it, what you see is just, it might be the second, third, fourth year that leaf has been there and it's run its course and just needs to be killed back. In the wild, you'll get, there are these big dense masses of old and new foliage. They really don't lose their foliage at all. It'll just keep hanging on forever, for years and years and years. Other questions? Why are they called cast iron plants? Well, because they're tough as, they're basically, this is one that I can remember learning about this plant and then actually noticing it in a bar that I was at in college, where, there was no natural light at all. People probably, at that time maybe put cigarettes out in it, dump the end of their beer in there, and they would live, and they'd have 1 or 2 or 3 leaves on there, and they'd never grow, they'd never put on another leaf, but they would just survive like that forever. So yeah, they're just rock solid like cast iron.
There's an old Southern idea that when you had finished with your cast iron you're cooking in the fireplace, and when you'd finished with it, had holes in it and everything. That's what you threw in it to grow.
Say that again? I missed that.
When people used to cook in their fireplaces and they used a cast iron pot, when it got old and maybe got holes in it or something, they threw it out and put the aspidistra in it.
I'd never heard that.
I said that's an old saying.
An old saying that when you're...
It was true. I didn't say that it had any validity. I said it's an old Southern idea.
I love the old Southern idea that once you finish with your cast iron, gets old, pitted, and rotted through, you bring it outside and you put your cast iron plant in it. I'm gonna have to find an old iron pot so I can do that with it. That sounds awesome. And by the way, our garden conversation next week after next, will be with Dr. Janice Schwab, who just mentioned that. So you have to come up with some more old things that you've heard that are like that. All right. We'll keep on moving. Keep on keeping on. I'm not talking about boxwoods, y'all. Okay. Next plant is one that a lot of people think we can't grow in this area, and this is a cinnamon. Now, this is not any of the species that are used culinarily for cinnamon, but it is the same genus, Cinnamomum. This is Cinnamomum japonicum, so one of the Japanese cinnamons. And it's got great, you kind of crush the leaves and smell, great fragrance there. Which is nice when you bring it inside, but it can be cut. And I like plants like this. Some of these evergreen plants that have the green stems, they just, when you get them all with other things in groups, they really look beautiful. And the kind of yellow veins in this, I think really stand out. Now, you wouldn't want just a bundle of this. Probably you'd want to bring some other things in with it to fill it out. we make wreaths here at the Arboretum and swags and for doors and things. And we always use something like Fraser fir as the body of whatever we're doing, the bulk of it, and then add to that, have that as the background and the that we're kind of taking these other things on. So Cinnamomum japonicum ultimately gets to be a large tree. I mean, it in nature, in the wild, it can get to be 80 plus feet tall. Now, here it is much slower growing, but still will get to be a pretty good sized tree. And you can leave it as this is, where it's a shrub, kind of all the way down to the ground, kind of like a big magnolia. Or as it gets some size, you can start limbing it up because it can have really beautiful bark under there. Another great one for the garden, because again, I've always said deer don't eat it, but I've got a cinnamomum, different species, that the deer eat every leaf on it every year. I think the only reason it's still alive is because the green stems photosynthesize enough to keep it going. But I know once it gets, if the deer ever let it get taller than 2 feet, it'll grow up beyond them and be okay. But this is one of those that I like for that fragrance, kind of like why we have Fraser fir and those sorts of things in the garden, in wreaths and things like that. Any thoughts, questions?
Can you pass that around?
I can. You need to kind of do some crushing on there, or rubbing on the leaves, for you to get a real sense. Isn't that nice? So, all right. No other questions. We'll move on. Mahonia. Mahonia makes a great thing to cut and bring inside. It is one of those spiny plants that bite, but they got nice long stems, so you can cut them back hard. Many of them are in flower going into fall and winter. So if you're willing to whack off a big part of your plant, and as I tell my wife, why do you need to get a bow for that wreath or for that decoration? Just put a big old piece of this on there to kind of serve as that focal point on it. I think spectacular. There are a lot of different mahonias out there. This is one of the media types, which tend to grow very upright, very tall, big flowers in fall, big bundles of flowers. The other nice thing about cutting them, if you cut it regularly, you don't have to worry about fruit, which is a concern in some areas of fruit. Birds eating the fruit and moving them around, and they pop up here and there, especially the older leather leaf Belii types, the bigger leaves. The media types, not quite as much. But there are other mahonias out there. There are shrubby ones. There are really blue-leaved ones. There's a lot of variation out there, sometimes hard to find, but all of them, in my experience, the leaves hang on really well. Mahonia is a weird genus. We have them native on the West Coast. They go down Mexico into Central America. They are all through Asia, and then some people lump them all into Berberis, the barberries, as one genus. And really what we should probably have is Berberis, and then a Mahonia that's Asia and West Coast, the upper Pacific Northwest, and then a different species that's the U.S. Southwest and Mexico, Southwest and a little bit into Mexico, and then the more southern Mexico into Guatemala and Central America as a third genus. But nobody wants to get all in that, because then you throw in the barberries and they confuse everything with it. So it's one of those odd things where you start looking. If you look at the plants, you can tell them apart. If you look at the DNA and evolutionary history, they get confusing. Questions or thoughts? Excellent. Great plant for cutting. Just a little way around the corner here. So a couple of native southeastern plants that I think are fantastic are palms. We've got several southeastern palms that are great landscape plants that we can also bring inside. Probably the most common one you see in North Carolina is sable minor of our natives. This is a shrubby palm, usually without a trunk or with a partially subterranean trunk. It can become trunked in some forms, but generally it's going to stay relatively low. But you cut these big fronds off, and they make beautiful backdrops. They make beautiful pieces, and will stay green for quite a while. They'll eventually turn brown, which is just as nice. I do sometimes cut these and bring them inside. We're always changing things out, so even though you can keep a palm as it's dried, you can leave it inside for for years. I'll take it out, and as we get into winter and the deer start getting bad with some of my young plants, I stick palm fronds around them, and it helps keep the deer from noticing them so much. It kind of covers them up. And when I look out my window, out at my garden, down my woodland garden especially, the brown palm fronds look a little more natural than, some of the other things I've done to keep deer away from young plants. So I like it from that perspective. And then when I'm done with them, I just throw them in the compost pile. I don't have to worry about, storing them somewhere. Because I tend to throw things in a spot and not store them carefully. So I really like these for that purpose. I will say the dwarf palmetto, sable minor, is probably one of my biggest weeds in the garden. If you don't cut off those the fruit stalks, good gosh, every one of those seeds will germinate. And when they germinate, by the time you see those little, one or two little fronds coming up, man, they have rooted down so deep. I need a weed wrench to get them out. So I just cut off the fruit stalks on there. But they are great plants. They're natives. They'll grow in sun. They'll grow in shade. They'll grow in dry soil, wet soil. They're pretty much foolproof. We do have tree palms in the temperate southeast. This is sable palmetto, the palmetto palm. This one's a little bit harder to bring indoors because it's got this very much a curve to the leaf where the costa, as it's called, the little point, here, so it won't give everybody whiplash, and show on here. This area is the costa, and it's a way to identify palms in some measure. So this is very palmate. What you would call this is costa palmate, where the costa is elongated, and it kind of palmate, kind of a pinnate leaf, feather-like leaf, but it's somewhere in between. So it's, neither fish nor fowl. But, which, unless you're using several of these kind of in a vase or something, is hard to use. There is a plant, a plant called Sable brasoriensis. It is listed as, it was sold as Sable brazoria texas or brazoria form, but it's palm taxonomists have decided it's a true species from Brazoria, Texas, that grows a trunk, grows these simply enormous leaves, but they're more palmate like sable minor and are a little bit easier to use indoors, I think. But these make great specimens. Now, sable palmetto is from a little bit farther south than us, so you really have to look for slightly hardier forms. But as we warm up, more of the forms we find are growing just fine for us.
What kind of grass are we standing on?
I'm sorry?
What kind of grass?
What's the grass?
What kind of grass are we standing on? Yeah, y'all are on newly installed sod. Don't let Greg know that you're standing on it. I'm not standing on it, so it's y'all. This is what we sodded here is a warm season grass, Tiff Tough. It's Bermuda. And from where they've bred a lot of grasses for our region, Tifton, Georgia. This is Tiff Tough, and this is an area that's fairly highly used with rentals and things like that. So we wanted that. We got it in just under the gun, late season. Probably wouldn't have been able to install this much later than we did, which was late October, early November. So these warm days are nice for that, but nice and cushiony. It is.
Great for entertaining.
I'm glad I was asked that right after this had been installed, because give me another month and I'll be like, yeah, it's grass. It's Bermuda. All right, well, we'll keep going. Okay. Another great plant for cutting and bringing inside is alysium, the anise shrub. And there are quite a few. This is another of those plants that has weird distributions. Mexico, Eastern North America, Asia. It kind of grows across there. It grows in the tropics in Asia. It grows in temperate regions in Asia. It's called anise shrub, star anise bush, star bush, because it is related to the star anise of culinary use, the spice star anise. But we have native ones. This is a native alysium. This is Alysium parviflorum. One of our natives. There's Alysium parviflorum and Alysium floridanum in the southeast. And it's nice. It's a great evergreen shrub. It can get to be a big shrub, but you can cut it back pretty easily, keep it going that way, or let it grow big. Deer tend not to eat alysium, which is one of the great reasons to grow them. And it does well as a cut stem. It's not my favorite for a cut stem. I think the Asian Alysium anisatum holds up a little bit longer. But whether you're growing anisatum or parviflorum or both, they both work great for cut flowers. And there are some different forms. Alysium parviflorum, there's one called Florida Sunshine if you want, and Banana Appeal, another one if you want that solid gold to add a little pop of color to any of your cut stems. There's with them, there's also some variegated ones, Shady Lady and Spring Frost maybe, that have kind of whites and grays in there that you can cut and bring inside. So you can bring some of those pops of color like that. Now my very favorite for cutting though is another Asian one called Alysium lanceolatum. And you can see it's got these narrow leaves, much more lanceolate. And when you compare kind of the two, the parviflorum and lanceolatum, you can see it's just got that nice darker color, and it holds that color a little bit better inside. And the smaller leaf holds up a little bit better inside. Both great shrubs. Small kind of waxy flowers in the spring, followed by if they're pollinated, little fruits that look like star anise. However, these other species, poisonous. Don't eat the seeds of any of the hardy star anise in place of the culinary ones, because you will not make a good whatever you're making out of it. Stick to the true star anise, which is called Alysium verum for true. So you got to get the true one for that. Questions about Alysium? one of the nice things about alyssium, they can get quite big, but you can whack them back really hard to basically nothing, and they will regrow from that. So you can really, if they've gotten out of hand, just go in and with chainsaw cut it all the way back and let it re-sprout. Or you can keep them smaller by yearly pruning, or you can just let them get big. Okay. Y'all, if you want to see the plant, you may want to come this way because it's kind of hidden behind this one over here. Okay. Now, if you want a plant that is one of the more coveted plants by flower arrangers and cut flower folks, that the one that they really always want, and it's often hard to come by, is this poet's laurel, Danae racemosa. Like those first ones we were talking about, the ruscus, these leaves are actually modified stems called cladodes. However, they don't flower in the middle of the leaves. They flower at the little branchlets at the terminals, and then will form fruit. You can cut these and they will stay green with no water for months. I mean, they really will just last and last and last. So flower arrangers or people who do a lot of cut flowers at home like them because they can stick them in a vase and have nice green and just replace flowers as they fade in and out and leave these. And it's got, it's got a nice spray. It's very, very user friendly compared to some of the others. The reason this is so coveted is because from seed, and you can see we've got lots of seed, all these little fruits here, they've got a nice seed in there, and they're really pretty easy to germinate. And they will germinate, and you'll get a leaf or two, and then you'll get a couple of leaves about this big, and that's what you've got for about 3 or 4 years. It takes a very long time for it to actually grow into a plant that you can do anything with. And really, you're looking at 6 years often before you would even want to start cutting on it at all. So, no nursery is growing these things because that's a losing proposition. The place to get poet's laurel is if you have a friend who has one and they're willing to divide a piece out for you, or they've got a seedling that's grown up and been in the ground for years and years, or master gardener plant sales. Because people will dig them up, little ones where it's just a few leaves, they're maybe 2 or 3 years old, little thing, and they'll dig it up out of their garden and bring them in, and you can get them for like $5, $8, something like that. I always stop at like master gardener sales and little places like that, and that's one of the things I look for because they're great plants. You can pop them in anywhere. They really like shade. They always look good. Every great once in a while, I'll go in and cut out an old, tired-looking branch on there, but it's not like the ruscus where you're going to have to do it on a fairly regular basis. I mean, it's really, I don't know if you can see this, but if I can, they are tough. This is an old stem, and you can see it's getting yellowy and spots in there. But it was also mostly hidden in here, but you could come in and clean them out. Again, I'm a lazy gardener. It's got to start looking pretty bad for me to do that. And as I did that, it did have fruit on it that came off while I did this. So I'll throw that seed down and we'll get some more out here, hopefully. The birds don't eat the seed, don't eat the fruit, so they don't move around, which is nice. They stay on the plant, so they'll last for a pretty long time. And even after they get a little bit shriveled, they're still fine.
I took a cutting from my shrub the first weekend of June to make a table centerpiece for my niece's wedding shower, and I brought it home with me, and it still looks as fresh as it did in June.
Yeah, they last for ages and ages and ages. It's amazing, June to December doesn't really surprise me. Now, I thought you were going to surprise me and maybe shock me when you said you took a cutting of it. I thought you were going to say you rooted a cutting of it. Does not root. Does not. I have never once come across anybody, any information, any hint that this will root. And people have tried and tried, because if you could root this and, in another year get another shoot, you could sell it as a 1 gallon plant for, $15 or $20. It doesn't work.
What about air layering? Anyone try that?
What about air layering? This, this is an arching habit. You will never go around a plant and find where it has rooted in, where it's touching the ground. It just does not initiate roots in the stem. Now, somebody please prove me wrong and show me something that shows where that has happened, because theoretically, any plant should be able to root, but people have tried and tried and tried with this, and I've never heard of one plant rooting, not one piece of luck with that at all, ever.
The phylogenetics, is it primitive or is it advanced?
The phylogenetics, is it primitive or is it advanced? That's a great question about whether it's primitive or not, and I don't know that.
Family or tag says asparagus.
Yeah, this is another one of those Asparagaceae, Liliaceae. Yeah. That's a pretty broad group of plants, but yeah. And there are, I should mention, when I say asparagus, there's some great evergreen asparagus too. And they will last and last and last inside. Not edible asparagus, but they're all edible, not palatable. All right. Well, thank y'all all for coming out on this beautiful, beautiful day and joining me. There's a whole lot more we could talk about. I always tell people, rather than worrying about will it last inside or will it not, cut it, see if it'll last inside. If it doesn't, it might not. But it's always good to try it out. The worst that happens is you have to pull some branches out and put something else in to look good. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day at the Arboretum. It is a beautiful one.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
This is fun. I hadn't been out here. I hadn't done this in a while.